guys, this is Stephanie from the Sewing Works, and today we're going to talk about how to quilt your Celestial Lights block of the month that we've been working on. With your last month, you're going to get several quilting files that you can use your embroidery machine to finish off your quilt. There's several that you can just decide how you want to place them, mess around a little bit. I'm just going to show you what we've come up with. There's many options. Also long arm files, so if you really want to take everything to your local long armor, you can do that as well. So let's get started. When you're quilting in the hoop, the first thing that you want to do is use your 505 spray and adhere your batting, your back, and your top together. The easiest way to do that is to find as big of a flat surface as you can and just slowly work from one end to the other. Get them to stick together, trying to work out as many puckers as you can. It is helpful to have a lot of extra backing, probably about 6 inches bigger than your top, so that you have something to get in the hoop, because when we're quilting in the hoop, we don't use any stabilizer. Your back and your batting become your stabilizer, so you need extra. Mine's not quite big enough, so I'm probably going to end up having to sew some scrap piece of fabric around the sides and the top and the bottom, just to give myself some extra space. When I'm quilting on my embroidery machine, I like to use the biggest hoop that I have, as well as the biggest machine, just so I can cover a little bit more space at a time, do some less hooping. So today I'm using the jumbo hoop on our 880 machine, which gives me the maximum amount of space that I can. Also, when I'm picking my design, if I'm using several different designs, I try to limit myself to only 3 or 4 shapes, just because I don't want to overwhelm the quilt and have too much going on. What I chose today, look at the screen, is I chose a simple triangle shape, and I rotated it, and I brought in the same shape, same triangle shape, and rotated it the other direction so that you can see I have a square here. And I'm using that square to fill in my space between my stars. My space between my stars is approximately 10 by 12. And you can see here that I resize things to 9.5 by 11.5. That just gives me a little bit of wiggle room all the way around so that I cannot be overlapping my quilting and give myself just a little bit of room. I don't want things shoved too close together. One thing I did want to point out is that when you go into your iMenu and we're going to resize, this button right here, that lock screen, that little lock, will keep your proportions as you're resizing. Like if you have a circle, it's going to continue to be a circle instead of turn to an oval as you resize. Most of the time we like that selected. In this case, I unselected it because I wanted to change my height and my width separately on my design so that I could get right into that 9.5 by 11.5 inches. After you've picked your design and you've resized it to the size that you want, the next thing is to position it. Because I'm using my 880 machine, I am going to end up using pinpoint placement because I know that I didn't hoop it straight, I didn't have my grid. So we're just going to get it in there using pinpoint placement. The first thing that I like to do with pinpoint placement is I go into my check screen. So I can see my boundaries that my design falls in, and then I'm going to choose my target, which takes me to the center of my design. With this particular pattern and the way that it was put together, I did not draw my centers like I normally would. Instead, I'm going to be using this seam here as my vertical center, and I can just barely see my points of my stars, which are would be my horizontal center. We'll eyeball it in. Again, when I'm quilting in the hoop, I am not precise unless I'm really trying to match up my starts and my end points, and in this situation, I'm not. So once I've selected my target, I can use my knobs and move them left or right until I get where I think my center is, and I can lower my needle to see if I've got it or not. And then I can see here that my screen has turned red, so I'm just outside my hoop boundary. This is another reason as to why I gave myself that little extra ½ inch, is that I can move it over, and you can see I'm about maybe 1/8 of an inch off my center. But because I have an extra ½ inch to play with, it's not going to be real obvious or make or break my design. And then I'm also going to use my up and down knob just to make sure that I've got myself in the center between my points of my star. And if you have to, grab a ruler or a straight edge just to kind of line it up. Once you've found your center, and you're happy at where you're landing, you go into your eye menu, and this box here is your pinpoint placement. For those of you that don't have pinpoint placement on your machine, I highly recommend that you use a grid to hoop it so that we can get it in there straight and centered. And we're going to use the 9-point setting on pinpoint placement. I'm going to choose a point. Typically, I go with my top and my bottom center points because that's typically where I tend to be a little bit more off, is going on the vertical side. From there, I'm going to use my knobs and try to get myself lined up with my seam. I do know that my center was off, so I'm also going to make this point off just to compensate for that. Once I like where it is, I'm going to hit set. And then I'm going to choose the opposite point. And what's important with pinpoint placement is that when you choose that second point, you want to make sure that you only move one knob. If you end up moving both knobs, you resize your pattern, and then it doesn't match everything else. So we're just going to use the one knob so that I can go towards the left and check it with my needle to see if I look like I'm pretty well centered, which I do. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set that. Now, looking at this screen, it is telling me that I'm still bigger than my hoop, and where it is this little ending point where my pattern ends is just outside my hoop. So again, I've got an extra ½ inch. I'm just going to nudge the whole thing over until I'm no longer red. And then we should be good to go. Once we're all aligned, we're going to go to our needle, which is going to take us to the point where we're ready to sew. There's a couple things to think about when you're doing this. If you want to make sure that you have a nice clean look on the back of your quilt, I would recommend bringing up your bobbin thread, and then when you're done, you tie a little knot, secure it, and then use your self-threading needle to sew it back into your batting. If you don't really care, it doesn't hurt just to go ahead and run it like you normally would the embroidery machine, and then when you're done, you'll just clip your threads on the back and maybe do a dab of frayed check just to secure those. It's completely up to you as to what you like. If you are not pulling up your bobbin thread, you can use this button right here, which is going to sew both triangles without stopping to let you pull up your bobbin thread or change your thread color. We're going to go ahead and we're going to do that one because I'm not going to worry about my back today. Another thing to be aware of as you are doing your quilting is all your extra quilt. You don't want this to fall down underneath your hoop and get sewn in behind. It's not a lot of fun to clean up. And I speak from experience on that one. And then you also want to make sure that you don't have too much quilt laying over your embroidery arm, because that can weigh it down and not allow it to move freely. So I often will just kind of use my hands to take up some of that weight and give it a little bit of support. When I quilt, I do start in the middle of my quilt and work my way out so that I can keep my fabric laying as flat and smooth as possible. I think we're ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and hit the go button. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of my 10 by 12 size areas with the same pattern, and then use the same process for my borders, but using the designs in there for borders, and we'll see what it turns out. If you've got questions, always give us a call. We are happy to walk you through how to do quilting in the hoop. Have a good one.